She should have let him die. Every law she had ever been taught screamed it. Let the king slip into the dark. Let the royal healers deal with the blood pouring off his broken body. But her fingertips brushed his skin, and the silence of the ravine shattered. His eyes snapped open. Molten gold. Not the fading ember of a dying man. A wildfire. His hand shot up and closed around her waist like an iron vice, dragging her against a chest still slick with silver blood. She could not move, could not breathe. He threw his head back and roared, and the sound was not human. It was a claim, ripped from his throat and hurled across the trees. One word, mine. The mark on her collarbone began to burn. And the girl the whole world had thrown away had just tethered her soul to a monster with nothing left to lose. The forest always spoke to Wren Hollis before the rest of the world woke up. She heard it in the hush between the trees, in the slow drip of dew off silver leaves, in the way the moss seemed to lean toward her fingers when she knelt to gather it. The others in the Ashfall pack never heard any of it. They heard strength, the crack of sparring bones, the roar of the warriors at dawn. That was the only language they respected. And Wren was quiet. Too quiet, they always said. Her wolf was small. Her voice was soft. Her hands were better suited to bandages than to battle, so they looked right through her, the way you look through a window you have stopped noticing. She was the one who mended the torn tunics. She was the one who brewed the fever teas that broke a child's sickness in the night. She was the one who ate her meals standing near the door, so she could slip out before anyone thought to hand her another chore. And still, every morning, before the sun cut through the canopy, she was out here, alone, doing the work that kept them all alive. They never thanked her for it. That was the part that ached the most. Not the cold, not the bruises Marlene left when Wren moved too slow, not the sneers from the girls who shared her stepmother's blood, but none of her burdens. No. It was the giving and giving into hands that never once turned to hold hers back. She had grown used to that ache. She wore it like her thin gray cloak, pulled tight around a body that had learned to expect nothing. But the forest saw her. The forest always saw her. This morning, the mist hung low and strange, curling around her ankles like something alive. The basket bit into her hip. Her breath came out in pale clouds. And then, something pulled. It started as a whisper deep in her chest. A tug, faint at first, like a thread hooked behind her ribs. She stopped, pressed a hand to her sternum. The pulling grew stronger. It was not fear. That was the strangest thing. Her heart hammered. Yes, but not from terror, from something older, something that felt almost like recognition. Come, it seemed to say. Come now, before it is too late. She should have turned back. Every rule she had ever been given told her to stay away from the forbidden wilds. The elders whispered of spirits out there, of the ghosts of the first shifters, restless and hungry. But her feet were already moving. The basket dropped from her hands. Herbs spilled across the wet earth, forgotten. And Wren ran. She ran the way she had never let herself run in front of the pack. Fast, wild, sure, leaping over fallen logs, ducking under low branches that reached for her hair. The mist parted before her like it had been waiting. The scent hit her before she reached the edge. Blood, not the clean copper of a hunted deer. This was darker, heavier, threaded through with something metallic and wrong that made her wolf shiver beneath her skin. She skidded to a stop at the lip of a ravine, and her breath left her body. Below, in the shallow red water of a broken creek, lay a wolf. But not just any wolf. He was enormous, larger than any creature she had ever seen. His fur was the color of moonlight over winter storms, silver catching what little light reached the bottom of that gorge. His flank rose and fell in shallow, stuttering jerks. He was dying. She knew it the way she always knew these things, bone deep, certain. And that thread in her chest, it was screaming now. She did not think about the danger. She did not think about the laws, or the legends, or what a girl of no account was doing at the edge of the forbidden wilds. She only knew she could not let his light go out. The climb down tore at her. Sharp stones bit through her palms. Her tunic caught and ripped. She did not care. By the time her boots splashed into the icy stream, the great silver wolf had begun to change. The fur receded. The massive body shrank and shifted. And where the beast had been, a man lay broken on the stones, even ruined, even bleeding. The power rolling off him was staggering. It pressed against her like a held breath, cold, regal, ancient. She dropped to her knees beside him. Her hands hovered over wounds deeper than anything she had ever treated. These were not the marks of a hunt. They were the marks of betrayal. Silver-tipped arrows lay scattered in the rocks, the kind forged to burn a shifter from the inside. Then she saw his face, and her heart stopped. She had seen this face before, on coins, on tapestries in the great halls, glimpsed the rare times she was sent to trade. This was Cain Thorne, the king, the one whose name was spoken in the same breath as fear and reverence, the cold sovereign, the one with no room in his court for mercy or weakness. And here he was, slipping into the dark. In her hands, she pressed her ear to his chest. Nothing. Just silence. A void so deep it threatened to swallow the whole ravine. Something inside her cracked open. She could not explain it, even to herself. It was not because he was the king. It was because the moment she had found him, something in her had recognized him, beyond packs, beyond titles, beyond anything the shadow of her small life had ever taught her. Her herbs would not be enough this time. She had to give him something more, something from the very core of her. She shifted, leaning over him, her hands framing his jaw. His skin was clammy. His lips were turning blue. She closed her eyes, and deep inside, she reached for the small, flickering spark of warmth she had always kept hidden. The part of her the Ashfall pack had tried so hard to snuff out. It answered. It flared to life, golden and desperate. She lowered her mouth to his. She meant only to breathe her life into his lungs. Nothing more. But the moment their skin met, the world shattered. Light poured out of her, warm as liquid sun. It raced through her veins and spilled into the broken vessel beneath her. Behind her closed eyes, she saw it. A shimmering tether snapping into place, weaving their two lives together into something no blade could ever cut. His heart gave a sudden, erratic thump, then another, stronger, faster, fueled by the light surging out of her spirit and into his. The stillness of the ravine broke apart. A wave of golden fire erupted from where their lips touched, flattening the tall grass, sending the creek water spraying into the air like scattered diamonds. And then Cain Thorne did not simply wake. He came back to life like a storm breaking. His eyes snapped open. Not dull, not fading. Molten gold, blown wide. His wolf surging to the surface with terrifying force. Before she could even gasp, his hand shot up and closed around her waist. Iron, searing, absolute. He sat up in one violent, graceful motion, pulling her hard against his scarred chest. His other hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, baring her throat as his nostrils flared to take in her scent. She was frozen, caught in the gravity of that golden gaze. And then he threw his head back and roared. It was not a cry of pain, not a call for help. It was a claim. The sound struck her ribs like a physical blow, vibrating down into the marrow of her bones. One word tore itself from his throat, jagged, possessive, ancient, mine. It echoed through the trees. It sent birds screaming into the pale sky. Even the wind seemed to fall silent in submission. On her collarbone, a mark began to burn, a brand of golden light forming beneath her skin, sealing something she did not yet understand. And far above them, at the very edge of the ravine, a single figure in silver armor stood watching, silent, still. Silas Voss had seen everything, and the quiet girl who had spent her whole life at the edge of every room was suddenly the most important person in the world. She just did not know it yet. The sound of marching feet came first, not the clumsy stomp of the Ashfall hunters. This was different, disciplined, synchronized, a rhythm that spoke of men who had trained their whole lives to move as one. Within seconds, the edge of the ravine was lined with soldiers in black and silver armor, weapons drawn, eyes sweeping the terrain with lethal precision. Ren froze against Cain's chest. These were the Black Crest Sentinels, the Royal Guard. And when they saw their king sitting in the mud, covered in blood, but very much alive, a collective gasp rose from the ridge. They scrambled down the slope, but they stopped short, several feet away, their eyes widening at the sight of her, at the girl in the torn tunic, the one still tangled in the king's arms, the one with a golden mark glowing faintly through the fabric at her collarbone. The lead commander stepped forward, a scarred man with eyes like flint. He lowered his sword in a gesture of respect. "Sire," he breathed, his voice thick with something close to disbelief. "We feared the worst." He reached out a hand to help, and Cain moved. Fast. Feral. His head snapped up, his lip curling back to reveal elongated canines. He shifted his body, dragging Ren behind the shield of his shoulder, his arm locking around her like an iron bar. The commander went very still. His gaze flicked from the king's snarl to the mark burning on Ren's skin, and understanding dawned across his weathered face. He did not see a commoner girl. He saw the woman who had brought their king back from the dead. One by one, the elite warriors of the Lycan realm dropped to one knee, in the mud, in the blood. Heads bowed in a silent, staggering tribute. Ren could not breathe. This was wrong. All of it. Men like these did not kneel for girls like her. Girls like her fetched their water and mended their cloaks and slipped away before anyone had to look too long. And yet, here they were, bowing. Cain finally turned to look at her. The gold in his eyes dimmed, just a fraction. His thumb traced the line of her jaw with a tenderness that did not match the raw power still radiating off him. You, he rasped. His voice sounded like grinding stone. You are the one who pulled me back. He did not wait for her answer. He turned to his men, and his voice regained its edge of command, even through the strain of his ruined body. Bring the transport. She comes with us. She stays at my side. A pause, cold, absolute. And if anyone so much as looks at her without my leave, I will have their head. The commander bowed lower, and Wren realized, with a jolt that ran cold through her veins, that her life in the shadows was over. She just did not yet know what had replaced it. The ride to the Citadel passed like a fever dream. The royal transport was a thing of dark metal and reinforced glass, moving through the forest with a ghostly hush. Inside, the air smelled of leather and something warmer beneath it. Amber light glowed soft against the walls. Cain refused to let the medics touch him until she was settled beside him. Even then, his hand stayed anchored on her thigh. Heavy. Certain. As though he expected her to dissolve the moment he let go. Wren watched the silver mist forest blur past the windows, gray and green, smearing into nothing. Just a morning ago, she had been worrying whether she had gathered enough mint for Marlene's tea. Now she sat beside the most powerful man in the world. The contrast made her dizzy. Part of her still expected to wake up on the thin straw pallet in her cold shed, the whole thing dissolving like frost in the sun. But the heat of his hand was real. The dull throb of the mark on her collarbone was real, and when she turned her head, she found him watching her. Not the way a king watches a subject, the way a man watches something he cannot quite believe is real. "What is your name?" he asked, low, rough. "Wren," she whispered. She had spent so long being no one that saying it aloud felt like a confession. He repeated it, slowly, like the syllable was a rare thing he was turning over in his hands. "Wren." And then he let out a long, shuddering breath. Something in his shoulders loosened. "For 3 winters," he said quietly. "My mind has been a storm, a constant screaming rage that never stopped, even when I slept. The healers called it a sickness of the spirit, a rot that no medicine could reach." His fingers tightened just slightly against her leg. "But the moment you touched me, the storm went quiet." Wren's chest ached. She understood then that she had not simply mended his body. Something in her had reached out to the madness in his wolf and pulled it back into stillness. She had given him something no one else could. And no one had ever needed her like that before. Ironcrest was not a building. It was a mountain carved into a monument. As the transport glided through the massive arched gateway, Wren felt the sheer weight of the white stone walls pressing in on her. Every spire reached toward the sky like a jagged claw. Guards in shimmering silver stood along the pathways, still as statues. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, and her heart sank. This was a world of cold permanence, so far from the muddy paths and herb beds she had known. Beautiful and terrifying. A cage. She knew it the moment she saw it. When the doors hissed open, the mountain air bit at her skin. Cain stepped out first, but he did not move more than a foot away. He waited, hand extended toward her. A silent demand. She took it, her small fingers vanishing into his calloused palm. The moment they crossed onto the courtyard stones, a sea of servants and officials dropped into deep bows. The silence was absolute, and Wren felt every pair of eyes on her, curious, judging, confused. She was dressed in a torn, dirt-stained tunic, her hair a tangle of leaves and sweat, and she was being led into the royal heart of the empire by the king himself. He did not stop for the officials who tried to approach with scrolls and reports. His focus stayed on the path ahead, and on the woman at his side. They wound through corridors that grew richer with every turn. Polished marble floors, walls draped in tapestries showing a history she had never been taught. At last they reached a set of massive doors, dark oak, bound in silver, the royal wing. Inside, the suite stole her breath, velvet the color of midnight. A fireplace large enough to stand in, crackling with warmth that finally reached her chilled bones. Cain led her to the inner chamber, a sprawling room that looked out over the whole valley. He turned to her, his golden eyes moving over her face like he could read every secret she had ever kept. "This is where you will stay," he said, low, certain, leaving no room for argument. And something in Wren, something that had spent her whole life being told where to sleep, what to fetch, how small to make herself, pushed back. "Am I a guest here?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "Or am I a prisoner?" The question hung in the air. Cain's brow drew together, as though the thought had not occurred to him, as though, in his world, being wanted by a king could only ever be a gift. "You saved my life," he said slowly. "You are the only reason the storm in my head has gone silent. Why would I ever let you leave?" That is not an answer. She heard herself say it, and her own heart pounded at the daring of it. But she had spent a lifetime having her choices made for her, by Marlene, by the pack, by people who never once asked what she wanted. She would not simply hand that power to a new set of hands, even golden ones. Cain went very still. For a long moment he only studied her, and something shifted behind his eyes. Surprise, yes, but underneath it, something almost like respect. "No one speaks to me like that," he murmured. "Then perhaps," Wren said softly, "no one has ever told you the truth." The corner of his mouth curved, not a smile, but the ghost of one. "You will stay because it is not safe for you out there," he said. "Not because I command it. There are those who would use you to reach me. I would sooner burn this citadel to the ground than let that happen." He stepped closer. His voice dropped. "But make no mistake, Wren. What you feel between us, this bond, I did not choose it any more than you did. And I will not pretend I want you gone." The honesty of it undid her a little. She had braced for a cage, for a command. She had not braced for a king who would meet her question head on. Days in Ironcrest passed in a strange golden haze. Cain was bound to his duties, but he was never truly gone. Wren could feel the tether humming at the back of her mind, low and constant, alive. It told her he was near, that he was thinking of her, and every evening, without fail, he came to walk with her through the high gardens. They were a marvel. Rare flowers that only bloomed under moonlight. Vines that seemed to lean toward her hands the way the forest moss always had. For a few stolen moments, kneeling in the dark soil, she could almost pretend she was home. He found her there one evening, as the sun bled into the valley. She did not hear him approach. His movements were too quiet, too much like the wolf she had found in the ravine. She only knew he was there when the air shifted, when the scent of gathering storm and damp earth wrapped around her. "They told me I would find you here," he said. She looked up. He had shed his regal robes for a simple black tunic that clung to his chest. He looked less like a king, more like the creature she had saved. He reached down, offered his hand. She hesitated, looking at her mud-streaked fingers. He did not care. He pulled her to her feet, his touch lingering at her waist long after she was steady. "You have a gift for making things grow," he observed. She shrugged, felt the old prickle of shyness. "Plants are simpler than people," she said. "They do not care about rank or strength. They only care whether you listen to what they need." He was quiet a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant peaks. Then he took her hand and pressed her palm flat against the cool stone of the garden wall. "Close your eyes, Wren." She obeyed. The world went dark. Her other senses sharpened. The warmth of his body beside her, the steady thrum of his heart, the whisper of wind through moonflowers. "Do not just feel the surface," he murmured, his fingers laced through hers. "Listen to the pulse of the earth. Everything here has a rhythm. The stone, the roots, the water moving beneath the mountain." His breath was warm against her ear. "My wolf hears it all, but it is usually a cacophony, noise that never stops." He pressed down gently. "With you here, it becomes a melody." And suddenly, she felt it, a deep, rhythmic throb rising from the heart of the mountain, slow, ancient. A heartbeat that seemed to sync with the mark on her collarbone. The intimacy of it stole her breath. They were connected, not just by the bond, but by the very world around them. A soft, golden heat traveled down her arm, into his skin, and Cain let out a low, rough sound that was almost a purr. His head dropped to rest against her shoulder. The cold king, the tyrant the world feared, seeking comfort in the touch of a girl the world had called nothing. Something warm and dangerous bloomed in Wren's chest. Not fear, not duty. Something she was not yet brave enough to name. She turned her head. Her lips brushed his forehead. Featherlight. And for one heartbeat, the rest of the world simply ceased to exist. Two outcasts, anchored in the dark. But the peace did not last. A distant silver horn split the night, echoing across the valley. Cain lifted his head. The softness fled his face. Something cold and wary took its place. "The Alphas," he said quietly. "They have come for the summit." His arm tightened around her. "Stay close to me tonight, Wren. These are not gentle men, and they will look at you, and they will see only a way to hurt me." She nodded, but somewhere in the dark beyond the garden walls, a pair of pale eyes was already watching. Silas Voss had been waiting, and the hunt was only beginning. The great dining hall felt more like a battlefield than a place for a meal. Long tables of dark polished wood stretched the length of the chamber, laden with roasted meat and blood-red wine. And the air was thick with the competing scents of a dozen high-ranking shifters. Musk, aggression, ambition, and underneath it all, the faint rot of hidden agendas. Wren sat beside Cain at the high table, small in a gown of pale sage silk. This was the first time she had been placed before the gathered alphas of the outer territories, and the weight of their collective stare was almost enough to crush her. She could hear the whispers, the commoner who had bewitched the king, the low-born runt with no place at the sovereign's side. Her hands trembled around the silver fork. The metal felt cold, heavy, foreign. She had rubbed crushed mint into her wrists earlier, a small comfort from her herbalist days. But even that was being drowned out by the overwhelming assault of the court. She felt like a rabbit that had wandered into a den of lions, every instinct screaming at her to run back to the shadows where it was safe. But Cain felt her distress before she said a word. He was locked in a tense exchange with an alpha from the northern reaches, his face a mask of bored indifference, but his hand rested on the back of her chair, his thumb tracing slow, steady circles against the wood. Then he shifted his weight, and his presence seemed to expand until it filled the space around her. It was deliberate, a kind of shielding, wrapping her in the scent of storm and ancient forest, building a wall of power between her and the rest of the room. The sharp edges of the hostile stares dulled. The cruel whispers faded to a hum. "Eat, Ren," he said softly. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. "You need your strength." She looked at him, surprised by the plainness of his care. He was not just protecting her from claws and teeth. He was shielding her spirit from the poison of his own court. She took a small bite of bread and felt the knot in her shoulders begin to loosen, but the peace was short-lived. A sharp scent of old iron and bitter herbs cut through Cain's shielding. It made her stomach turn. 3 seats down sat a man of sharp angles and hidden depths. His cold eyes were fixed on her with a predatory interest. Silas Voss. He raised his glass toward her. A thin, mocking smile stretched across his face. "A fascinating addition to our table, sire," he said. His voice carried a silken threat. "It is rare to see a healer of such humble origins in the Black Crest. One wonders what other secrets the Ashfall Pack has been keeping from us." The table went silent. The other alphas leaned in to see how the king would answer such a blatant provocation. Cain's thumb stopped moving on her chair. The air did not simply grow cold. It seemed to freeze entirely. He turned his head slowly toward Voss, his golden eyes narrowing until they were mere slits of molten light. A low growl started in his chest, deep enough to make the glassware tremble. "Her origins are irrelevant, Voss," Cain said. "Quiet. Dangerous. She is the lunar aura. She is my mate. And if you ever speak of her in that tone again, it will be the last time you speak at all." Voss's smile faltered, but the malice in his eyes did not fade. He bowed his head in a mock gesture of surrender. And as Ren looked down at her plate, she saw a single drop of dark, oily liquid staining the white tablecloth beside her hand. A silent warning. Something was already circulating through the heart of the palace, and it was not loyalty. The walk back to the suite was thick with Cain's suppressed rage. He said nothing, but she could feel it rolling off him in waves. When the doors closed and the guards took their posts, he paced the length of the room like a caged beast, muscles twitching with the need to shift and hunt. Ren stayed by the window, watching the moonlight dance on the peaks, trying to make sense of a night that had named her the mate of the king of all Lycans. "I should have torn out his throat where he sat," Cain growled. His voice cracked with the strain of holding back. "Voss thinks he can test me because I have been focused on my recovery. He thinks your presence makes me weak." He stopped, turned to look at her, and his gaze softened as it landed on her tired form. "He is wrong. You are the only thing that makes me strong enough to hold this kingdom together." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just inches from her. "You are trembling," he said, quieter now. "Tell me what is wrong." "It is just, everything is so much," she whispered, looking down at her feet. "In my pack, staying out of sight was my only safety. No one strikes what they are not looking at." As she spoke, she shifted her weight, and the silk of her gown pulled tight across her shoulders. She winced. A dull ache flared in the small of her back, a lingering reminder of a punishment Marlene had given her weeks ago for a crime as small as fetching water too slowly. Kane's eyes sharpened instantly. His predatory instincts had caught the flicker of her pain. Before she could protest, his hands moved to the laces at the back of her dress. Efficient, undeniable. "What are you doing?" she gasped, trying to pull away. But he held her firmly in place. "Kane, stop." He did not listen. With a single fluid motion, he loosened the silk, drawing the fabric down just far enough to bare the skin of her upper back. She froze. The cool air hit her skin, and a wave of deep, burning shame washed through her. She knew what he would see. The skin there was a map. Old faded welts, jagged scars, the physical record of years of small, systematic cruelty. The marks of a girl who had been used as something to strike when the world felt too heavy on other shoulders. She kept her head bowed, waiting for the disgust she was certain would follow. The room went deathly still. She braced for it, for him to turn away from something so ugly, to ask why she was so damaged, as if the damage had been her doing. Instead, the temperature in the room plummeted. Kane's breathing became a series of low, dangerous huffs. When she finally dared to look over her shoulder, she saw that his face had transformed. His eyes were no longer gold. They were a terrifying, solid black, the pupils having swallowed the iris entirely. His wolf was at the very surface, claws extending and retracting as he stared at the ruin of her back. His hand reached out, hovering just a breath above the oldest mark, trembling with something caught between reverence and murder. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, and the sound was not human. It was the roar of a hurricane, contained within a man's throat. She tried to pull the dress back up, but he caught her wrists, gentle, despite the storm in him. "Ren, give me their names." She looked into his fractured black eyes, and what she saw there terrified her. Not the rage, the devotion. He was not simply angry. He was devastated, undone by the thought of her pain. "It was my pack," she managed, her voice breaking. "My stepmother, her children. It was just how things were, for a runt." Kane let out a jagged, wounded sound. He pulled her into his chest and buried his face in her hair. "They will pray for the mercy of death before I am finished," he vowed, and it was a promise of absolute ruin. "Every hand that touched you in malice will answer for it." Ren stood very still against him, and something strange happened inside her. For her whole life, those scars had been a source of shame, a thing to hide, a reason she was unworthy, unlovable, small. But here, held in the arms of a man shaking with grief on her behalf, she felt the shame loosen its grip. Just a little. For the first time, someone had looked at the worst of what had been done to her, and had not turned away. He had looked, And he had stayed. Not the useful girl who mended tunics, not the quiet one who fetched the water. Her, all of her. The wounds and the light, both. And the strangest part, the part that made her throat ache, was that being held was harder than being alone. Alone, no one could reach her. Held, she suddenly had something left to lose. They sat together on the thick rug by the hearth long into the night. Cain would not let go of her hand, his grip almost too tight, as if he feared the moment he released her, the darkness might rush back in to fill the space. "It has been like this for years," he said at last, his voice so low she had to lean in to hear it. "Long before the ambush, it starts as a whisper in the back of my mind, a reminder that I am a monster, that I am destined to tear down everything I have built." He stared into the flames, the fire reflected in his eyes. The stronger the Lycan, the louder the shadow speaks. I watched my father succumb to it, and his father before him. I thought I was next. I had already made my peace with it. Ren's chest tightened. "I was simply waiting," he went on, "for the day I would have to ask a loyal man to put a silver blade through my heart before I turned on my own people." She reached out, smoothed the dark hair back from his forehead. The intimacy of his confession was almost more than she could hold. He was showing her the one thing he could never show the world, his fear. "You are not them, Cain," she said softly. He looked at her then, a sad, knowing smile touching his lips. "I have something they did not have," he murmured. "I have you. A girl from a pack that never even bothered to learn your name. And yet, you carry the only power in the world that can quiet the beast." He shook his head slowly. "It is a cruel joke of the universe, is it not? The king of the world, saved by the one person the world told him was nothing." Ren was quiet a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "Maybe the world was wrong," she said, "about which things have value and which do not." She thought of all the mornings she had knelt in the cold mist, gathering herbs no warrior would ever thank her for. All the fevers she had broken, all the wounds she had closed, all the quiet work that had held an entire pack together while they looked straight past her. "They only counted the things they could see," she said. "The size of a wolf, the strength of a blow. But there are things that hold a world together that make no sound at all." Cain went very still. He was watching her now with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Say that again," he said quietly. "There are things that hold a world together," she repeated, "that make no sound at all." Something moved across his face, something that looked almost like wonder. "You truly believe that," he said, not a question. "I have to," Ren answered. "It is the only way to make sense of a life like mine." They talked until the first light of dawn crept through the windows. He told her about the weight of a crown he never asked for, the loneliness of a life where every touch was a transaction of power. She told him about the forest, the way the moss feels after rain, the quiet joy of finding a rare flower in a hidden ravine. For those few hours, they were not a king and a lunar aura. They were just two people who had found an unexpected sanctuary in each other. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping declarations, only truth laid bare in the dark. And somehow, That was more romantic than anything Wren had ever imagined. As the sun finally rose, Cain lifted her hand to his lips, warm, lingering. "I do not want you only for the healing, Wren," he said, his voice regaining its depth. "I want the girl who was not afraid to climb down into that ravine. I want the woman who saw the monster and did not run." A tear slid down her cheek, a mix of relief and something blooming that she was finally brave enough to name. But the peace was a thin veil, and beneath it, a pit of vipers waited. The next morning, Wren went down to the herbalist gardens, and she felt the shift in the air the moment she stepped outside. The servants no longer whispered about the king's recovery. They whispered about a spy in the royal wing, that the Ashfall pack had sent her not to heal the king, but to bewitch him, that her lunar aura was nothing more than a dark enchantment meant to weaken his mind so her pack could seize the borders. It was a lie, a vicious, calculated lie, and she knew exactly who had planted it. She was walking back when a hand caught her arm and pulled her into the shadow of a stone alcove. She gasped, her hand flying to the mark at her collarbone. But it was not a guard. It was Voss. He was dressed in his full military regalia, silver medals catching the dim light. He did not look angry. He looked amused, like a cat that had already cornered its mouse. He did not release her arm. His fingers dug in with a cold, clinical pressure. "You have caused quite a stir, little healer," he said, his voice a silken purr of malice. "The court is a delicate thing, and you are a parasite, draining its host." "I am not a parasite," she spat, trying to wrench free. "I saved him. I am the only reason he is still standing." Voss laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "And that is exactly the problem." He leaned closer. His scent of iron and bitter herbs made her head spin. "Let me tell you something, girl. I once had a brother, a king in his own right, strong, brilliant. And then he found his anchor. He grew soft. He stopped listening to his counsel. He handed his enemies the knife with his own hands, and the rot took him anyway. I watched him tear apart everything he built with a smile on his face, because he believed love had made him whole." His grip tightened. "A king who leans on a woman is a king who can be turned. I will not watch it happen twice." He reached into his coat and produced a heavy, clinking bag. "There is a carriage at the eastern gate. Take this gold. Go back to your woods. Vanish into the trees where you belong. And I will tell the king you fled when you were discovered. He will hate you. Yes, but he will remain a king." Wren looked at the gold, then at the cold, dead certainty in his eyes, and she understood something. Voss was not simply hungry for power. He believed. In some broken, grieving corner of himself, he truly thought he was saving the kingdom. That was what made him dangerous. She lifted her chin, and when she spoke, her voice did not shake. "He would never believe your lies," she said, her grip tightening on the mark at her throat. "He knows my heart better than you ever will." Voss's amusement vanished, replaced by something colder, purer. He leaned in until his breath hissed against her skin. "We shall see about that, little girl. You think a fated bond can survive the weight of a kingdom in revolt? I have planted seeds you cannot even imagine." He released her with a violent shove. "By the time this is finished, You will wish you had taken the gold." And he vanished into the corridor, leaving Wren alone in the dark, her heart pounding, but her spine, for the first time in her life, refusing to bend. The sacred waters lay deep in the roots of the mountain. Cain had asked her to come with him, and the way he asked, low, almost reluctant, told Wren it cost him something to admit he needed anything at all. The healing kiss had halted the rot, but it had not erased it. A lingering weakness still lived in his bones, a shadow that only these ancient waters could soothe. "The pool holds the oldest lunar energy in the realm," he had told her, "but my wolf grows restless there. The magic stirs him. I need you close to keep him grounded." And so she went. But something in Wren had changed on the walk down, a small, quiet thing. She noticed it in the way she no longer trailed a step behind him. She walked at his side now, not because he had granted it, because she had decided to. The chamber stole her breath the moment the doors opened. It was a cathedral of steam and silver light, a great circular pool at its center, fed by a waterfall spilling down a wall of translucent quartz. The water shimmered with an inner glow, casting soft, restless reflections across the arched ceiling. The air was warm, heavy, thick with the scent of ancient minerals and something like the first rain of spring. Wren stood at the edge, her heart racing. Cain began to strip away his outer layers, and she looked away, then found she could not. He was a vision of raw power, all hard angles and scarred muscle, moving with a predatory grace even now, even weakened. The silver light traced the old wounds along his ribs. The marks of 100 battles survived. He was, she thought, the most beautiful and terrifying thing she had ever seen. "The water is cold at first," he said. His voice echoed in the vast space. He stepped into the pool. The silver liquid swirled around his waist. Then he looked back at her, his gaze heavy with a longing that made her knees weak. "Come here, Wren. The bond is restless today. I can feel your heart, beating faster than mine." She hesitated, looking down at her simple linen shift, but the pull in her chest was undeniable. She stepped into the water. The chill made her gasp. Yet, as she moved toward him, the warmth of his aura began to radiate through the silver depths, chasing the cold away. She waded closer until they stood almost chest to chest at the center of the pool. The steam curled around them, sealing off a private world where titles and kingdoms no longer mattered. Cain reached out, his wet hands sliding up her arms to rest on her shoulders. The water amplified everything. The lunar aura within her stirred, answering the sacred energy of the pool. A profound peace washed through her, the fear and shame of the past nights beginning to loosen in the silver light. She looked up at him, her breath hitching at how near he was. His face was inches from hers, his golden eyes searching her, patient and hungry all at once. "You are the only thing that feels real to me anymore," he whispered, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip. "In this court, everything is a lie or a trap, but your light is the only truth I have left." And here was where the old Wren would have simply melted, would have let herself be swept under, would have taken whatever warmth was offered and been grateful, the way she had always been grateful for scraps. But something in her had begun to insist on more. She lifted her hand, pressed it flat against his chest, not pushing him away, but holding a small space between them. "Cain," she said softly, "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth." He went still, surprised. "Ask." "When you look at me." Her voice was quiet, but it did not waver. "Do you see the woman who saved you? Or do you see the thing that keeps the storm quiet in your head?" The question hung in the warm air. She watched him carefully, because the answer mattered more than she had let herself admit. For her whole life, Wren had been wanted only for what she could do: mend the tunic, break the fever, fetch the water. She had been useful, never treasured, and there was a terrible fear coiled deep inside her that this too was only that the king held her close the way a drowning man holds a rope, not for what she was, for what she could give. She had decided she would rather know the truth and ache than live inside a beautiful lie. Cain was quiet for a long moment, and she saw him understand the weight of what she was truly asking. "I will not pretend the bond means nothing," he said slowly. "It is real. I feel it. You quiet the noise I have carried my whole life." Her heart sank, just slightly. "But that is not why I cannot look away from you," he went on, his voice dropping. "The storm being quiet only lets me hear everything else. The way you speak to my counsel as if you were born to a throne. The way you knelt in the mud of my gardens and made the flowers turn toward you. The way you looked at the worst of me and did not flinch." He took her hand from his chest, pressed it to his lips. "I do not want the healer, Wren. I have had healers. I want the woman who told me the problem was never her. I want the one who is asking me this question right now, instead of simply taking what she is given." Something inside her chest went very still, then very warm, because no one had ever answered that question the way she needed it answered. No one had ever chosen her over what she could do for them. "You could have lied," she whispered. "It would have been easier." "I am done with easy," Cain said. "Easy is what kings do to keep people close. I would rather have you look at me and know I meant every word." And that was the thing that undid her. Not his beauty, not the heat of his body in the silver water. His honesty. Her hand slid up from his chest to the back of his neck, her fingers curling into his damp hair. And for the first time, she was the one who pulled him closer. Not to heal him, not to save him, because she had asked for the truth, and he had given it. And she had decided freely, with her whole self, that she wanted this. The world blurred into a haze of silver and shadow. His lips brushed against hers, a ghost of a promise. They were a single heartbeat from losing themselves in each other, when the heavy stone doors were thrown open with a violent crash. The sound cracked through the chamber like a thunderclap, shattering the silence, shattering the moment. Cain reacted instantly. His wolf surged to the surface as he spun, his body shielding hers, muscles tensing for a fight. A frantic guard stood in the doorway, his face pale, his armor dented. "Sire, forgive the intrusion," the man gasped, trembling. "The perimeter has been breached. The northern gate has fallen. They are already inside the lower levels." He swallowed hard. "It is an uprising, sire. Voss has moved sooner than we feared." The change in Cain was instant. The man who had just whispered against her lips vanished. In his place stood the sovereign, cold, commanding, a war machine given human shape. He stepped from the pool, water streaming off his body, and within seconds he was barking orders. He did not even reach for a shirt. His wolf snarled just beneath his skin, ready to hunt. Ren pulled herself from the water, heart pounding, and hurried after them into the chaos of the corridors. It turned out to be a small force, a handful of mercenaries, a test more than a true assault. The Black Crest Sentinels crushed them before they ever reached the royal wing. But the message was clear. Voss was probing the walls, searching for the weak point. And the piece of the moon pool was already a memory. That night, the thing they feared most returned. Ren felt it first through the bond. A sudden cold ran through her like ice water in her veins, not the warm, protective hum of Kane's energy. This was jagged, decaying, wrong. She ran to the royal suite, her heart slamming against her ribs. She found him in the center of the bedroom, his back arched in agony, his hands clawing at the fine silk of the sheets. The veins in his neck stood out, pulsing with a dark, oily light. The shadow wrought. The sickness that had nearly killed him in the ravine, surging back, triggered, she understood, by the strain of the breach, by the toll it had taken on his weakened body. He let out a sound that was barely human, a mangled roar of pain and feral rage, his eyes shifting rapidly between their natural gold and a fractured, splintered black. "Ren, get out," he wheezed, his body jerking as his wolf fought for control. "The darkness, it is clawing its way back. I cannot hold it." The air around him began to distort. A storm of negative energy that made the shadows in the corners of the room stretch and writhe like living things. He was losing himself to the madness that claimed all great Lycans, the primal rage that would turn him into a mindless monster if it was not stopped. And here was the choice. She could feel the danger pouring off him. His wolf was not gentle now. It would not know her. It would not care that she had saved him. If she stepped into that storm, it might tear her apart before it recognized the light she carried. Every ounce of the frightened girl she had once been screamed at her to run, to do what she had always done, make herself small, slip out of the room, survive. But that girl was already fading. In the ravine, she had acted on instinct, on a pull she could not name. This time, she knew exactly what she was walking into, and she chose it anyway. "Kane," she said, steady, clear, "I am not leaving. Ren, please." His voice broke into a snarl. "I could kill you." "No," she said, "you could not." And she stepped into the center of the storm. The pressure hit her like a wall. It pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. The wind that had somehow risen inside the room whipped her hair across her face. The shadows reached for her, cold and greasy, whispering of despair and violence. She felt the rot try to reach into her own spirit. A sickening tug, dredging up every old wound. You are nothing. You were always nothing. Small, forgotten, unworthy. The voice was not Kane's. It was the voice of every person who had ever looked straight past her. Her stepmother, the girls who shared Marlene's blood, the whole pack that had never bothered to learn her name. And Ren, for the first time, turned and faced that voice. "No," she said aloud, "to the darkness, to the years, to all of it. You do not get to name me anymore." The mark on her collarbone flared, a brilliant defensive light pushing back the shadow crawling across the floor. She reached Cain, her hands finding his face despite his attempts to shove her away. His skin was burning, and yet he shivered, bone deep with cold. Cain, look at me. His fractured eyes, more black than gold now, fixed on her. Find my light, she said. I am the anchor, and you are not going into the dark. Not tonight. Not while I still draw breath. She pressed her forehead against his, closed her eyes, and visualized the golden tether that bound them together. This time she did not pour her energy through a kiss. She did it through will, through choice. A steady, unwavering flow of peace, sent straight from her soul into his. His wolf snapped at her, a mental snarl of pure aggression, testing her, trying to drive her back. She did not flinch. She wrapped her spirit around his, absorbing the jagged edges of his pain, replacing them, one by one, with the deep quiet of the silver mist forest, the hush between the trees, the slow drip of dew, the heartbeat of the earth she had always been able to hear when no one else could. Come home, she told him, without words. Come back to the quiet. Slowly, the violent tremors began to subside. The dark light in his veins faded, replaced by the steady, healthy glow of his own power. He slumped against her, his heavy head falling to her shoulder, and he let out a long, broken breath. The room went still. The shadows retreated to their proper places. They stayed like that a long time, Ren holding the full weight of the king as his heartbeat found its rhythm again. He was safe, but a terrifying clarity was settling over her. The ambush had never been the true danger. The poison was not in his blood. It was rooted in his very soul, woven into the bloodline itself. And she, only she, stood between him and a fate worse than death. When his breathing finally steadied, Cain lifted his head. His eyes were gold again, clear but heavy with something she could not read. You should have run, he said quietly. I know. Why did you not? Ren was silent a moment, her fingers still resting against his jaw. Because I have spent my whole life running, she said, making myself smaller, slipping out of rooms before anyone noticed I was there. It kept me safe, but safe is not the same as alive. She met his gaze. I am done choosing safe, Cain, even if the alternative is a storm. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he took her hand, turned it over, and pressed his lips to the center of her palm. Not with hunger this time, with something closer to reverence. Do you understand what you just did? He asked, his voice rough. You did what my strongest warriors could not, what the healers with all their medicines could not. You reached into the worst of me, and you were not afraid to name it. I was afraid, Ren admitted. I was terrified. But you stood your ground. But I stood my ground. Something passed between them then, deeper than the bond, deeper than the mark burning on her skin. For a while, Cain simply looked at her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. There is something I have been afraid to tell you, he said at last. Ren waited. When my father fell to the rot, he said, there was a woman who could have anchored him, the way you anchor me. But she was afraid. She saw what he was becoming, and she chose to save herself. I have never blamed her for it. Fear is a reasonable thing. He paused. But it meant I grew up watching my father tear himself apart, believing that no one would ever be strong enough to stay. His golden eyes held hers. And then you climbed down into a ravine for a dying stranger, and tonight you walked into a storm that could have killed you. For a man, the whole world calls a monster. His voice broke, just slightly. I do not know what I did to deserve someone who does not run, but I am terrified of the day you realize you could have. And there it was, the thing beneath his crown, beneath his power, beneath the roar that had claimed her in the ravine. He was not afraid she was weak. He was afraid she would leave, the way everyone had always left him. Ren reached up, cupped his face in both her hands. "Listen to me," she said, and her voice was steady, certain. The voice of a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for taking up room in the world. I did not stay because a bond told me to. I did not stay out of duty, or fear, or gratitude for being pulled out of the mud. She held his gaze. I stayed because I chose to, and a woman who chooses can be trusted to stay. Cain closed his eyes, and she felt some old, deep tension finally release in him, as though a door that had been locked for a lifetime had, at last, been opened. He pulled her against his chest, and she let herself rest there, listening to the steady, grounded beat of the heart she had brought back to life. For so long, Ren had believed that being needed was the closest thing to love she would ever be allowed. But this was different. This was two people, each terrified of being left, choosing to stay anyway, and that, she was beginning to understand, was worth far more than being useful. But even in the quiet, a warning stirred in the back of her mind. Voss had promised seeds she could not imagine. And somewhere out there in the sleeping citadel, those seeds were already breaking open. The storm in Cain's blood had been calmed for now, but the storm gathering around them both was only just beginning to break. The library of the citadel was a labyrinth of ancient stone and towering shelves. It smelled of dust and old leather and secrets. And in the days after the storm in Cain's blood, it became the place Ren went when she needed to think. She had been called a runt her whole life, a commoner, a girl of no account. And yet the power that had saved a king twice over felt like something ancient, something formidable. She wanted to understand it, not for Cain, for herself. That was new, that small shift. For so long, everything Ren did had been for someone else, to please, to serve, to avoid a blow. But now she found herself pulling down crumbling scrolls and heavy silver-bound tomes, simply because she wanted to know the truth of what she was. She spent hours there, her fingers tracing faded ink. And the more she read, the more she realized the history of her kind was far stranger than a simple hierarchy of strength. Deep in the restricted archives, tucked behind a collection of old war strategies, she found it, a small, unassuming book bound in white wolf skin. The pages were so thin they were almost translucent. The moment she opened it, the mark on her collarbone began to pulse, a rhythmic, insistent light. The text was written in an old dialect, one that spoke of the first era of the moon. And as she translated the passages, the words seemed to leap off the page. They spoke of the lunar aura, a rare and sacred lineage, ones who appeared only when the Lycan bloodline stood in danger of being consumed by the primal madness of the great wolves. The one the world names a runt, the text read, is often the vessel of the moon's purest light. Wren's breath caught. To the eyes of the many, they appear small, and of no account, their beasts quiet, their strength hidden. But they are the descendants of the first healer, the ones born to be the anchor for the sovereigns. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She read it again and again, making sure she had not imagined it. She was not a mistake, not a fluke of nature. The very things that had made her an outcast, her small stature, her quiet wolf, her strange sensitivity to the pulse of the earth, were the marks of a power that had lain dormant for centuries. The text continued, describing the role of the lunar queen, not as a consort, but as the king's ultimate protector. While the king held the power of the sun and the sword, the lunar aura held the power of the soul. Without the anchor, the sovereign would eventually fall to the rot, his mind fracturing under the weight of his own strength. And then Wren read the passage that changed everything. The lunar queen answers to no council. She is not raised by vote, nor unmade by one. Her claim comes from the moon alone. Once she names herself before the assembled packs, no law of men stands above her. Only the moon that chose her may unmake what it has made. Wren sat very still in the dim light of the archive. She read the words a third time, slowly, letting them settle into her bones. The lunar queen answered to no council, not beside it, above it. If she claimed the title before every alpha in the realm, there would be no vote left that could touch her. No committee of frightened men could remove what the moon itself had placed. She was the only thing that could keep Cain human, not a burden he tolerated, not a healer he had rescued. The one force in the world that stood between the king and the abyss, and a force that no vote could unseat, if only she was brave enough to claim it aloud. Something rose in her chest that she had never felt before. Not pride, exactly. Something deeper, quieter. For her entire life, she had carried a name given to her by other people. Runt. Nothing. The girl no one remembered. And she had believed it. That was the cruelest part. She had worn their word for her, like it was the truth. But it had never been the truth. It had only ever been their blindness. She closed the book, her hands trembling, and for a long moment, she simply breathed. All those years spent trying to earn a place at a table that was never going to make room for her. All those mornings knelt in the cold, giving and giving to a pack that could not even be bothered to look up. She had thought the smallness was hers, but the smallness had belonged to them. She was not the one who had been too little. They had been too blind. And here was the thing she understood now, sitting alone among the old scrolls, a truth she would carry for the rest of her life. A person does not become worthy the day someone finally sees their worth. The worth was always there. The seeing, or the not seeing, says everything about the one who looks, and nothing about the one who is looked at. She had been of value in the mud of the Ashfall pack. She had been of value when Marlene struck her. She had been of value every single morning she gathered herbs no one thanked her for. They simply had not had the eyes to see it. And now, at last, she no longer needed them to. She stood, the chair scraping loudly against the stone floor, echoing through the silent library. She needed to find Cain. She needed to tell him what she had learned, that the threat was far greater than a political coup, that Voss did not simply want the throne. He wanted the king to fall into madness, so he could rule over the ruins. Because if Voss could remove the anchor, the sovereign would destroy himself. But as she turned to leave the archives, she felt it. The shadows between the shelves seemed to thicken, a cold mist rolling across the floor. The light from her mark struggled to pierce the gathering gloom. A soft, mocking laugh echoed from the dark. And Wren understood, with a chill down her spine, that she was not simply a protector. She was a target, and the hunt had truly begun. The blow came the next morning, and it did not come with claws or poison. It came with words, spoken in a chamber full of powerful men. The Council of Alphas had gathered in the strategy room, a circular chamber where a great map of the territories glowed across a stone table. Cain sat at the head, his face an iron mask, and Wren sat just behind him, a silent presence that clearly unsettled several of the men in the room. They did not like that a commoner was privy to their secrets, and they liked even less that the king's attention strayed to her whenever she shifted in her seat. It was Voss who struck, calm, patient, deadly. "Sire," he said, rising to his feet, "I speak now not as your rival, but as one who fears for the throne." The room quieted. The outer packs are restless. There are whispers of revolt in 3 territories, and the cause of that unrest, my king, is not hard to name. His pale eyes slid toward Wren, a low-born girl, elevated above the bloodlines, placed at your side without ceremony, without lineage, without the consent of the council. The Alphas will not follow a sovereign they believe has been compromised. He let the word hang. I ask, therefore, for a vote, not to harm the girl, only to remove her from the court, for the stability of the realm. Let her live out her days in comfort, far from these halls, and let the kingdom see that its king still answers to something greater than his own heart. Cain rose, fury rolling off him. "You dare?" "I dare because it is true," Voss said evenly. "Ask them, sire. Ask your own council." And Cain, trapped, turned to the gathered Alphas. One by one, they lowered their eyes. One by one, they raised their hands. The vote was not close, and Wren watched, her heart sinking, as the men who ruled the outer world declared that she did not belong among them. It was the old wound, reopened. A whole room deciding she was not enough, not the right blood, not the right shape. But this time, it landed differently, because this time, she knew the truth of what she was. Cain's hands had curled into fists. "I will not honor this," he growled. "Then you will lose them," Voss said quietly. "All of them. And a king with no packs behind him is no king at all. You will have your girl, and you will have a war. Choose." The room went silent, and Wren understood, with terrible clarity, the trap that had been laid. If Cain kept her, he lost his throne. The packs would splinter, the kingdom would fall into revolt, and a fractured kingdom would give the rot in his blood every opening it needed to finish him. If Cain sent her away, the anchor would be gone, and the madness would take him within a season. Either way, Voss won. Either way, Cain died. Unless she stopped playing by his rules altogether. That night, Cain came to her, and for the first time, he did not know what to say. He paced the length of the suite, his jaw tight, his golden eyes stormy. "I will find a way," he said. "There is always a way. I will not let them take you. Cain, I would rather burn the whole council to ash than—" "Cain," she said it softly, and he stopped. She crossed the room to him, took his hands in hers. For a moment, the old wren stirred inside her, the one who would have made this easy for everyone, who would have quietly packed her things and slipped away in the night, so no one would have to fight over her, so she would not be a burden, so she could go back to being small and safe and unseen. That girl whispered that leaving would be the loving thing, the selfless thing. But Wren had learned something in these long, strange days. There is a difference between sacrifice and disappearing, and she was done disappearing. "Listen to me," she said. "You are asking the wrong question. You keep asking how to keep me and keep the throne, as if those are the only two roads on the map. They are the only two roads." "No," she said. "The truth is that Voss built a trap where every road leads to your death, and you do not escape a trap like that by walking down one of the roads he built for you." Cain frowned. "Then what do you propose?" Wren was quiet a moment, because the answer had been forming in her all day, and it frightened her. But it also felt more true than anything she had ever done. "I read something in the archive," she said slowly, "about what I am. The Lunar Queen answers to no council. She is not raised by their vote, and she cannot be unmade by one. Her claim comes from the moon alone." She lifted her chin. "Voss called for a vote to remove a lowborn girl, but he cannot vote away the Lunar Queen. The old law places her above the council, not beside it. Above. If I claim the title openly, before every alpha in that hall, there is no vote left that can touch me. Only the moon could unmake it. And the moon already chose." Understanding dawned slowly across Cain's face. "You mean to claim it," he said. "In front of them all." "I mean to stop hiding," Wren said. "For my whole life, I let other people tell me what I was worth. My pack, my stepmother, and now a council of frightened men. I let them measure me and hand me the number." Her voice grew steadier. "I am finished with that. Voss wants a girl he can vote out of a room, so I will not give him a girl. I will give him a queen, and I will do it where every alpha in the realm can witness it, so that after there is no law of men left standing to cast a single vote." Cain stared at her, and something moved across his face, something that was not quite pride. It was larger than that. It was awe. "They will try to stop you," he said. "Voss will not let you stand up unchallenged. He has already moved against us once. He will move again, and harder. I know. It could cost you everything. I know that too." She stepped closer, rested a hand against his chest, over the steady beat of the heart she had fought so hard to keep. "But I would rather stand up and lose than spend one more day shrinking so that frightened men can feel tall. I did that for a lifetime, Cain. It nearly cost me my soul. It is not a bargain I will make again." He covered her hand with his own. "When did you become so certain?" he asked quietly. Wren thought about it. "In the archive," she said, "when I read what I truly am. But it was not the reading that changed me. It was realizing that it had always been true, even when I did not know it, even when no one else did." She met his gaze. "I was never nothing, Cain. I just believed the people who told me I was, and I am done believing them." They spent the rest of that night in preparation. Cain sent for the eldest keeper of the citadel's records, an ancient woman who confirmed with trembling hands and wide eyes that the mark on Ren's collarbone was indeed the mark of the old lineage, the lunar queen, not seen in living memory, and that the old law was exactly as Ren had read it. No council could stand above her once she claimed her place. He drew up the ancient rite, the one that would present Ren to the full court, not as a guest, not as a rescued healer, but as the sovereign's equal, his anchor, his queen. The midnight gala, already planned to solidify Cain's reign, would become the stage for it. And they both knew what that meant. Voss would not let such a night pass quietly. He had promised seeds she could not imagine, and a public claiming would force him to act before those seeds fully bloomed. As the first light of dawn crept over the peaks, Ren stood at the window of the suite, looking out over the sleeping kingdom. She was afraid. She would not pretend otherwise. But underneath the fear, something solid had settled in her chest, something that had never been there before. For her whole life, she had waited to be chosen, waited for someone to look up from their own busy world and finally see her, finally decide she was worth keeping. She was not waiting anymore. She had read the truth of what she was, and she had chosen to believe it. Herself. First. Before the crowd. Before the crown. Before Cain. And a woman who has counted her own worth, alone in the dark, does not hand the sum to anyone else to check. Behind her, she heard Cain stir. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. Even if the whole world had voted against you, even if every alpha in the realm had turned their back, I would still have seen you." Ren smiled softly, her eyes on the rising sun. "I know," she said, "but the difference now, Cain, is that I no longer need you to." And somewhere far below, in the cold heart of the citadel, Silas Voss was sharpening the last of his knives. The gala was coming, and with it, the reckoning. The grand ballroom of the citadel had never looked so alive. 100 candles burned along the walls, their light spilled across marble floors polished to the shine of still water. Banners of black and silver hung from the vaulted ceiling, and the air was thick with music and wine and the low hum of 100 conversations. Every alpha in the realm had come. Every powerful shifter who had, only a day before, raised a hand to vote her out of the court. And tonight, they would watch her walk in as a queen. At the top of the grand staircase, Ren stood with her hand resting on Cain's arm. She wore a gown of liquid silver. It clung to her form and shimmered with every breath she took, as though it had been woven from moonlight itself. At her collarbone, the mark glowed steady and warm, a golden beacon that no fabric could hide. Cain wore his full regalia. His crown of dark iron and silver sat atop his head. His gaze was fixed forward, cold and untouchable. But his hand rested over hers, his thumb tracing slow circles against her skin, a private steadiness meant only for her. "Are you ready?" he murmured. Ren looked down at the sea of faces below, all of them waiting, all of them ready to judge, and she felt the old fear rise, the instinct to shrink, to make herself small, to slip back into the shadows where it was safe. She let the feeling come. and then she let it go. "No," she said softly, "but I am doing it anyway." Kane's mouth curved, just barely. "That," he said, "is the only kind of ready that has ever mattered." They began to descend, and the ballroom fell silent. Every eye tracked their movement down the stairs. She could feel the waves of it: curiosity, hostility, judgment. But for the first time in her life, it did not make her want to hide. Because she was no longer walking into that room as the girl the Ashfall pack had thrown away. She was walking in as something she had chosen to become. Let them look, she thought. Let them look all they want. Their looking could no longer decide what she was. The music swelled into a sweeping melody, and Kane led her to the center of the floor. The other couples parted like a sea before a storm. As they began to move, Wren felt the rhythm they had practiced in the empty ballroom rise up in her body. But tonight, it was different. There was an edge to it, a charge. This was not a dance. It was a declaration. Every turn, every lingering touch, a message to Voss and every alpha watching. She is mine, and I am hers. And no vote in the world will change it. The golden light of the lunar aura began to bleed into the air around them. A soft glow that made the silver of her gown look truly alive. "You are breathtaking," Kane whispered, his lips near her ear. "They cannot even look away." Wren looked up at him, and for one perfect moment, she let herself believe they might actually win. Kane pulled her into a deep, final dip, his face inches from hers. The crowd erupted into a mix of applause and stunned silence. It was a moment of pure triumph. And that, of course, was when Voss struck. The sound came first. The shattering of a massive glass carafe at the edge of the ballroom. And then the gas. A thick, greenish-silver fog poured out of the broken vessel, spreading across the floor with an unnatural speed. It clung low, curling around ankles, rising like a tide. Wren saw Voss at once, standing by the pillars, a gas mask already covering his face, his eyes glinting with murderous triumph. "The king is dead," he shouted, his voice muffled but carrying. "Long live the new order." Panic erupted. The shifters nearest the gas began to cough and collapse, their wolves suppressed by the toxin, their bodies dropping to the marble. Kane grabbed her arm, trying to pull her toward the exit, but his movements were already sluggish, his eyes clouding as the fog reached them. He let out a strangled groan, his knees buckling as the poison struck his already weakened system. Wren caught him. The full weight of the king pulled her down to the marble floor as the chaos closed in from every side. The ballroom, moments ago a place of light and music, had become a nightmare of choking mist and screaming. The silver gas was a heavy, cloying fog. It clung to the floor and dragged the shifters down into a paralyzed weakness. A specialized poison, built to sever the connection between a Lycan and their wolf. All around her, the elite warriors of the court were falling like wheat before a scythe. But Wren felt a strange, burning clarity. The lunar aura within her was reacting to the poison, forming a protective barrier that kept the worst of the gas from her lungs. Kane lay in her arms, his face a mask of agony, his skin turning ashen gray. And in his veins, the dark light of the shadow rot was beginning to flare again, triggered by the suppressant. He was trying to speak, his hand clawing weakly at her arm, but no words came. And the terrible silence of his wolf was the most frightening thing of all. The steady, grounding hum of his presence, gone, replaced by a void. Ren looked up. Voss's men moved through the mist, soldiers who had betrayed their oaths, finishing off anyone who dared resist. And Voss himself walked toward her, his boots clicking rhythmically on the marble. He looked down at the fallen king with open disgust. A pathetic end for a supreme sovereign, he said, his voice echoing through the chaos, to fall not on a battlefield, but on a dance floor, clutching a girl who cannot even hold a sword. He drew his blade, the silver metal gleaming. I told you, girl. I told you that you would be the reason he lost his life. Your presence made him soft, made him believe a mate mattered more than the crown. He raised the blade. Now you will watch as I take everything he ever loved. And something happened inside Ren. Not fear, something colder, harder, steadier. For her entire life, she had made herself small in the face of people like this. People who were louder, crueler, more certain of their right to rule over her. She had bent. She had shrunk. She had folded herself into the walls. But that girl was gone. She had walked into a storm and come out knowing her own name. She had read the truth of what she was, and she had chosen to believe it. And a woman who has looked at her own worth in the dark, with no one watching, does not kneel to the ones who never bothered to look at all. Ren looked at the poisoned mist, and she understood something. This gas was not simply a weapon. It was a manifestation of the very darkness she had been born to fight. The shadow wrought, given form, built out of the exact thing her light was made to purge. She laid Cain gently against the marble, and she rose. Slowly, the mark at her collarbone began to glow, brighter and brighter, until the golden light started to push back the greenish fog around her feet. Voss's eyes widened, the mist recoiling from her. You cannot, he began. I do not have a sword, Ren said, and her voice carried through the ballroom with a clarity that cut through the screaming. I do not have the strength of your warriors. I never did. You made very sure I knew that. She lifted her hands, and they began to glow with the heat of 1,000 suns. You measured me by the size of my wolf, by the reach of a blade, and so you never once thought to guard against the thing I actually am. That was not my weakness, Voss. The light spilled out of her now, a golden tide sweeping across the floor, neutralizing the gas wherever it touched. It was yours, Voss snarled, and raised his blade to strike, but Ren did not flinch. I am the lunar aura, she declared, and the words carried a weight that shook the very foundation of the mountain. The anchor of the sovereign line, and you have no power in my house. The golden light erupted from her, a massive, blinding shockwave, a physical manifestation of her soul's claim. It slammed into Voss and his traitors, throwing them back against the walls, the mist tearing apart before it. But the moment the energy left her, a terrible drain hit her life force. She had pushed too hard, too fast. Her vision blurred at the edges. Her knees threatened to give. And as she looked down at Cain, she saw his eyes flutter open for a single second, saw him reach toward her before the world went dark. The dark did not last, but coming back was a brutal assault of noise and heat. Ren forced her eyes open, her lungs burning as though she had swallowed shards of glass. The ballroom was still a graveyard of fallen shifters, but the green mist was thinning now, shredded by the golden light that still pulsed from her skin in weak, fitful waves. She was on her knees, her silver gown stained with soot, and beside her, Cain still lay motionless, his breath coming in shallow, wet rattles. She could feel his life flickering, like a candle in a gale, the rot seizing its chance to finally extinguish the great Lycan king. Voss was picking himself up from the far wall, his face a mask of bloody fury. The shock wave had cracked the marble behind him. One eye was swollen shut, but he still held his silver blade. He looked at her, not with fear, with a fanatical, twisted hatred. "Kill her!" he screamed at the last of his men, his voice cracking with desperation. "Forget the king. Kill the girl first. She is the source of the light. If she falls, he dies with her." The soldiers stepped forward, their boots crunching on broken glass. Ren had no weapon, no training, no strength left in her limbs. But deep in her marrow, she felt a resonance, the ancient memory of the lunar aura, a power that was not meant only to mend flesh, but to protect the sanctuary of the soul. She reached out, one hand on Cain's chest, the other, palm out, facing the men. She did not try to strike them this time. Instead, she imagined the kiss of life expanding, a bubble of pure, revitalizing energy, a shield against everything unnatural and poisonous. A dome of shimmering gold erupted around them. When the first soldier fired his crossbow, the silver bolt did not pierce the light. It simply disintegrated into dust the moment it touched the edge. The men stopped, their faces pale as they realized they faced a power they could not calculate or conquer. The drain on her spirit was crushing, a heavy, dragging exhaustion that threatened to pull her under. But Ren locked her jaw, and she looked at Voss through the golden shield. "You spent your whole life certain that steel was the only strength worth counting," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "And every day you walked past the one power that could have saved your brother. Because it was quiet. Because it did not carry a blade." She poured her intent into the mark at her collarbone, drawing energy directly from the bond. "The moon governs the tides and the hearts of all living things. You brought your rot into this house, and now you will watch it burn away." She sent ripples of golden heat across the marble, seeking out the last of the silver gas, neutralizing it on contact. And as the air cleared, she felt a change beneath her hand. Cain's heart gave a sudden, powerful lurch. The gray tint of his skin began to dissolve, replaced by a fierce, healthy bronze. The shadow rot that had been clawing at his mind met the full force of her aura and recoiled, scorched by a purity it could not survive. His hand came up to cover hers on his chest. No longer weak, the grip of a predator handed back his life. He looked up at her, his eyes no longer fractured, glowing with a solid, terrifying gold that promised a reckoning the kingdom would never forget. Cain rose, and the heat rolling off him was no longer the fever of a dying man. It was the furnace of something ancient reclaiming its throne. He stood with a slow, deliberate grace that sent a wave of visible terror through the traitors. Ren's legs finally gave out, but he caught her, pulling her against his side, a pillar of absolute strength that kept her from collapsing. His focus turned to the man who had dared bring poison into his home. Voss. The name sounded like a death sentence. He moved with a speed the eye could not track, And when Voss lunged, desperate, his silver blade aimed at the king's throat. Cain caught his wrist. The sound of shattering bone echoed through the silent ballroom. The blade clattered to the floor. Voss let out a strangled cry of agony, but Cain did not let go. "You thought I was weak," Cain growled, "because I chose to find peace. You thought my mate was a liability, because she did not come from a line of warriors." He leaned in close. "You were wrong. She is the only reason you are still breathing long enough to see your legacy turn to ash." With a surge of raw power, he threw Voss across the room. The general's body struck a stone pillar with a sickening thud, and he crumpled, broken, defeated. The royal guard, recovering now that the air had cleared, swarmed the chamber, seizing the last of the traitors, securing the exits. And Cain stood at the center of the ruin, the undisputed sovereign once more. He turned to Ren, the murderous light in his eyes vanishing, replaced by raw, aching relief. But it was Ren who spoke first. She pulled gently from his grip, and on unsteady legs, she walked to where Voss lay broken against the pillar. The soldiers tensed. Cain went still, watching her. Voss looked up at her through his one good eye, waiting, she realized, for her to give the order, for her vengeance. And Ren looked down at the man who had spent everything trying to erase her. "You told me a king who leans on a woman can be turned," she said quietly. "You told me your brother grew soft. That love made him weak." She crouched, meeting his eyes. "But you never understood what you saw. Your brother did not fall because he loved. He fell because no one stayed, because his anchor ran. That is the grief you have carried all these years, dressed up as wisdom. Not that love is weakness, that you were left behind, and you never forgave the world for it." Voss's face twisted, something raw flickering beneath the hatred. "I could end you now," Ren said. "No one in this room would lift a hand to stop me, but I am not going to, because you have spent your whole life certain that the gentle things are the weak things, and I want you to live a long time, knowing you were wrong." She rose. "Take him," she said to the guards. "Let him stand trial. Let the whole realm hear the truth, that the power he feared held his life in its hands tonight, and chose to let him keep it." And as they dragged Voss away, Ren understood the final piece. She had not saved the kingdom with strength like his. She had saved it with the very things the world had always called weakness: her gentleness, her sight, her refusal to become cruel, even when cruelty would have been the easier road. The gentle things were never weak. They had simply been waiting for someone strong enough to wield them. The days after the gala passed in a quiet, careful rhythm. The citadel was being scrubbed clean of the traitor's influence. Council chambers reopened, broken marble replaced. And slowly, the fear that had hung over the halls began to lift. Voss stood trial before the full court, and it was not the swift, brutal execution the old world would have demanded. It was something stranger. The whole realm heard the truth of what he had done, and the whole realm heard, too, the truth Ren had spoken to him on the ballroom floor, that his brother had not fallen to love, but to abandonment, that the thing Voss had spent a lifetime fearing was not weakness at all. He was sentenced to exile, stripped of rank, sent to live out his days far from the throne he had tried to seize. But before they took him, he looked at Ren one last time. And what she saw in his face was not hatred anymore. It was the hollow, dawning grief of a man realizing he had built his entire life on a lie, that the mercy he had never believed in had been the very thing to spare him. He said nothing, but he inclined his head, just slightly. And Ren understood that some prisons are not made of stone. Some are made of the stories we tell ourselves, and Voss would carry his for the rest of his days. The Ashfall Pack was disbanded. Marlene and her children were sent to the northern wastes, not to be tortured, not to be made an example of, simply removed, set far from the girl they had spent years trying to break. When word came of it, Ren felt no triumph. She stood at the window of the suite for a long while, watching the pale light move across the peaks, and she waited for the old satisfaction, the vindication, the sense of a debt finally paid. It did not come, because she understood something now that she had not understood before. Their cruelty had never been about her. It had been about them, their smallness, their fear, their need to have someone beneath them so they could feel taller. She had spent years believing that if she were only better, they would have loved her. But there was nothing she could have done. The blindness had been theirs. And realizing that, truly, finally realizing it, was worth more than any revenge could ever be. She was not free because they were gone. She was free because their opinion of her had finally stopped being the mirror she looked into. Ren spent most of her time now in the high gardens. It was where she felt most herself. Her fingers in the dark soil, the rare moonflowers turning toward her touch, the way the forest moss always had. In a world of silk and silver and cold marble, the gardens were the one place that still smelled like home. And it was there, one evening as the sun bled into the valley, that Cain came to her. She heard his heavy tread on the stone path. But something was different tonight. He did not come to stand over her the way he always had. He sat at the far end of the stone bench, leaving a deliberate space between them. He looked tired, the weight of the crown seeming heavier on him than it ever had during the war. He was dressed in simple travel clothes, no silver mail, no regal furs, and his gaze stayed fixed on the darkening horizon. "The council has finalized everything," he said, his voice level but stripped of its usual edge. "Voss and his followers are dealt with. Your step-family will never trouble you again." "Thank you, Cain," she said softly. He was quiet a moment. Then he turned to look at her, and her heart caught at the sadness in his golden eyes. "By the old law, Ren, you have more than repaid any debt. You saved my life, my mind, my kingdom. You have given me everything." He paused. "And I have given you nothing but danger, and a life you never asked for." He reached into his coat and produced a small iron key and a scroll bearing the royal seal. He set them on the bench between them. "This is the deed to a manor in the southern valley, near the Silver Mist Forest, but far from the reach of the court." His voice grew tight. "It has the finest gardens in the realm. You will have a pension that keeps you in comfort for the rest of your days." He drew a breath. "You are free, Ren. The bond is a powerful thing. But I will not use it to keep you in a cage of silk. I want you to have the choice I never had." He stood, his tall frame silhouetted against the dying light. "If you wish to leave, a carriage is waiting at the gate. I will tell the world you are my most honored advisor." living in well-earned peace. And Wren understood what he was doing. He thought he was setting her free. He thought that because he was a monster and a king, she could only ever stay out of duty, or the pull of a bond neither of them had chosen. He did not understand that the girl who had gathered herbs in the mud was the same woman who had stood in the center of a storm and refused to run. For a long moment, she said nothing. She looked at the iron key, at the scroll, at the escape he was offering her with such quiet grief, and something old stirred in her chest, because here, at last, was the thing she had wanted her entire life: to be given a choice, to be free, to have the door held open instead of locked. And she realized, with a strange, clear ache, that the freedom itself was the gift, not the manor, not the pension. The simple fact that, for the first time, someone had loved her enough to let her go. That was what made her certain. She rose, and she did not reach for the key. She reached for him. "Sit down, Cain." He blinked, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. But he sat. Wren stood before him, and for a moment she let herself simply feel the weight of what she was about to do, because this was the payoff of everything, not the crown, not the victory. This, the moment she got to choose, freely, with her whole heart, and to know, beyond any doubt, that the choice was hers alone. "You think I stayed because of a debt," she said. "You think I fought the rot in your blood because a law told me to, because a bond gave me no other choice. Did it not?" he asked quietly. "No." Her voice was firm. "And I need you to hear this, not as a king, as a man." She knelt in front of him, so that they were eye to eye, and she took both his hands in hers. "For my whole life, Cain, I waited to be chosen. I waited for someone to look up from their busy world and finally decide I was worth keeping." She held his gaze. "I made myself useful. I gave and gave, hoping that one day someone would give something back." Her voice softened. "And no one ever did, not until you." "Then stay because of that," Cain said, almost desperate. "Stay because I see you." "No," Wren said gently, and she watched the confusion cross his face. "Because that is the old way, the way I lived my whole life, waiting for someone else to hand me my worth. And I am done with that, Cain. I will not build my life on being seen by you, any more than I built it on being overlooked by them." She pressed his hands to her chest, over her own heart, over the mark that had started this whole story. "I know what I am now. I read it in the old book, but it was not the book that changed me. It was realizing the truth had always been there, that I was worthy in the mud of the Ashfall pack, on every cold morning no one thanked me for, long before you ever laid eyes on me." Her eyes filled, but her voice did not break. "I do not need you to see me anymore, Cain, because I finally see myself." Cain went very still, and she watched the understanding move across his face, slow, dawning, almost reverent. "Then why," he whispered, "if you do not need me, why would you stay?" And this was the whole heart of it. Wren smiled, soft, certain. The smile of a woman who had finally stopped shrinking to fit inside other people's comfort. "Because staying is not the same as needing," she said. "A woman who stays because she has nowhere else to go. That is not love. That is survival. I have lived that. I know the difference in my bones." She leaned closer. but a woman who has a manor waiting, a pension, an open door and a carriage at the gate. A woman who could walk away this very moment and build a quiet, safe life all her own. Her voice dropped to a whisper. When that woman chooses to stay, it means everything. She lifted his hand, pressed her lips to his knuckles. I do not want the manor, Cain. I do not want to be your advisor, living far away in comfort. I want to be exactly where I am. Not because a bond told me to. Not because I owe you. Not even because you saw me when no one else did. She met his eyes. I want to stay because I love you. And because a woman who finally knows what she is gets to decide where she spends her life. And I choose to spend mine here. With you. For a long moment, Cain could not speak. The supreme sovereign. The man the world feared as a cold-hearted tyrant. The one who had faced armies without flinching. He looked at her with tears standing in his golden eyes. I spent my whole life, he said, his voice rough, believing love was a weakness, a door an enemy could walk through. My father taught me that. Voss believed it to his ruin. He shook his head slowly. And you have shown me it is the opposite, that the strongest thing in the world is someone who could leave and stays anyway. He reached up, cupped her face in his hands. I do not deserve you, wren of the silver mist. No, she agreed with a small smile. You do not. But I am not choosing you because you deserve me. I am choosing you because I want to. And that is the whole point. He laughed then, a broken, wondering sound, and he pulled her against his chest. And they stayed there in the garden as the last of the light drained from the valley, two people who had each been certain they would be left, choosing, at last, to stay. The day of the ceremony was nothing like the midnight gala. No masks, no hidden poison, no green mist lurking in the shadows. The whole realm gathered at the base of the mountain, a sea of shifters from every pack, including those who had once looked down on the Ashfall runt with nothing but scorn. The air was crisp and clear, filled with the scent of wildflowers and the distant rhythmic drumming of 100 wolf hearts beating as one. Wren stood on the high dais. She wore a gown of pure white silk that seemed to drink in the morning sun. Her hair was braided with the silver ferns she used to harvest as a girl, a small, quiet tribute to where she had come from, and to the woman she had been, even in the years no one bothered to look. Cain stood before her, but he was not wearing his crown. He had handed it to his lead commander, and he stood before his people as a man first, and a king second. The silence that fell over the crowd was absolute, a heavy, reverent hush that spanned the entire valley. He took her hands in his, and the moment their skin met, the lunar aura erupted in a gentle, shimmering wave. It washed over the front rows of the crowd. Not a show of force, a blessing, a living proof of the peace they had fought so hard to win. Then Cain did something no sovereign in living memory had ever done. He spoke of his own weakness. To my people, he called out, his voice carried by the wind to the farthest edges of the assembly. I am your sovereign. I have led you with a cold heart and a sharp sword, believing strength was the only way to survive. He paused. But I was dying in the dark, my mind fracturing, my end already written in my blood, until a girl from the shadows, a girl your world called nothing, climbed down into a ravine, and brought me back to the light." A ripple moved through the crowd. "You looked at her and saw a runt," Cain said. "A commoner, a creature of no account, and you were wrong. Every last one of you was wrong. As I was wrong once about many things." And then the supreme sovereign, the man who had never bowed to anyone, slowly lowered himself to one knee, in the dirt. Before a woman the world had once thrown away. A collective gasp swept through the thousands watching. "Wren of the silver mist," he said, looking up at her. "You are not just my mate. You are my queen, my anchor, my equal in every way that has ever mattered. I belong to you, as much as you belong to me." He reached out and took the lunar crown, a delicate, shifting circle of moonstone and sunstone, and he lifted it toward her. But Wren did not simply bow her head to receive it. She reached out and took it from his hands herself, and for a moment she held it, turning it in the light, feeling the weight of it, the weight of everything it meant. Then she looked out over the sea of faces, all the packs, all the alphas who had voted her out of the court a lifetime ago, all the people who had never once bothered to learn her name, and she spoke, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the valley. "There is a girl," she said, "in every pack, in every corner of this realm, the one who mends the tunics, the one who breaks the fevers in the night, the one whose name no one bothers to learn." She let the words settle over the crowd. "You look past her every day. You count the strength of your warriors and the size of your wolves, and you never once think to count her, because the world has taught you that the quiet things do not matter, that the gentle things are weak." Her eyes swept the assembly. "But I stand before you as proof that you have been counting wrong. The things that hold a world together often make no sound at all, and the person you overlook may be the very one keeping you alive." She lifted the crown high. "I do not wear this because a king placed it on my head. I wear it because I finally understood what I was worth, long before any of you did." And then, slowly, she placed the crown upon her own brow. The moment the metal touched her skin, the bond between them solidified into something indestructible, a golden bridge that would span the rest of their lives. And the valley erupted, not with the polite applause of a court, but with a roar, a great thunderous sound of a whole people finally understanding what they were looking at, not because Cain had commanded it, but because, for the first time, the truth was too bright to look past. A queen who knew the value of quiet places. A woman who knew that true power did not come from the size of a wolf, but from the resilience of a heart that had been broken and had chosen to grow gentle instead of hard. Wren reached down and pulled Cain to his feet, her fingers tangled in the dark hair at the nape of his neck, and she brought his lips to hers. It was not a kiss of life to save a dying man. It was a kiss of love to begin a new era. When they finally pulled apart, Cain rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm and steady. "You know," he murmured so only she could hear, "you were supposed to let me crown you." Wren laughed softly. "I have spent my whole life waiting for other people to hand me my worth. I was never going to wait for one more thing, not even from you." "No," he agreed, his eyes shining. "I suppose you were not." They walked together to the edge of the dais, looking out over a kingdom finally at peace, the sun climbing higher now, painting the world in gold. And Wren thought of the girl she had been, the one kneeling in the cold mist before dawn, gathering herbs no one would thank her for, believing in her deepest heart that she was small, that she was nothing, that her only safety lay in staying out of sight. She wished she could reach back through time and take that girl by the hand. She wished she could tell her the truth she had learned in the hardest possible way. You were never nothing. You were never too small, or too quiet, or too weak. You were surrounded by people who could not see, and their blindness was never yours to carry. Your worth was there all along. In the mud, in the cold. On every morning, no one noticed you. It was there. And one day, you will stop waiting for the world to see it, and you will simply see it yourself. And that will be the day you are truly free. Cain's arms settled around her waist. He pulled her back against the solid warmth of his chest, and he breathed in the scent of mint and wildflowers that still clung to her after everything. He leaned down, his lips brushing the mark at her collarbone one last time. "Mine," he whispered, but it was different now. Not a claim, not a possession seized in a ravine. A promise, freely given, freely returned. And Wren smiled, watching the sun rise over a world that had finally learned to see her. "Yours," she answered, "because I chose to be." And that was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever heard.